Welcome back to the channel, you devotees of the arcane and buried secrets. Tonight, we are plunging deep into one of the darkest and most controversial chapters in U.S. intelligence history, a project whose very name sounds like a curse whispered in the dark, MK Ultra. Turn off the lights, draw the curtains, and prepare to face the most chilling question of all. Is your own government trying to control your mind? The story begins not in a secret underground lab, but in the cold, pervasive atmosphere of the Cold War. It was the early 1950s. The world was split into two opposing blocs, and America's greatest fear was not just the nuclear bomb, but something far more insidious: brainwashing. American prisoners of war from the Korean conflict were returning with nonsensical confessions of war crimes. Confessions many believed were the result of sophisticated enemy mind control techniques. For the strategists at the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, this was more than just a matter of national security. It was a black hole of understanding they absolutely had to fill. And from that fear, from that desperate desire to match or surpass what the Soviets and Chinese were believed to be doing, Project MK Ultra was greenlit in 1953. The goal? Chillingly clear: to find and develop drugs, chemicals, and biological procedures that could be used to control human behavior. In other words, the CIA wanted to create their own version of the Manchurian Candidate, a programmed assassin, or at the very least, a source who could be forced to reveal any secret under an irresistible truth serum. The head of the project was a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, an almost fictional figure, a man of terrifying zeal and an almost impossible indifference to ethics. Gottlieb wasn't just a scientist, he was the CIA's chemical wizard. Under his direction, MK Ultra wasn't a small research effort. It was a sprawling network encompassing more than 80 external organizations, from prestigious universities, public hospitals, prisons, and even pharmaceutical companies. To obscure the true origins, money was funneled through front organizations and fake research foundations, turning venerable institutions into covert labs with no outside knowledge. And this is where the story turns darker. To achieve the goal of behavior control, Gottlieb and his team didn't hesitate to experiment with anything that could alter the human mind. They weren't looking for a safe method. They were looking for the destruction of will. While many substances were tested, from barbiturates to amphetamines, the dark star of MK Ultra was a newly discovered hallucinogen: acid, LSD-25. The CIA became one of the largest funders and consumers of LSD in the world. They experimented with it extensively and unethically, not just on willing volunteers, even those who didn't know they were volunteering, but on incarcerated individuals, psychiatric patients, and, in the most horrifying cases, ordinary citizens who were dosed without their consent. They wanted to see if LSD could be used as a memory poison, whether it could utterly shatter a personality, and whether a new one could then be programmed into its place. The brutality of the methods was something hard to imagine even in the minds of the darkest Cold War theorists. They didn't just use drugs. They employed electroshock therapy of extreme intensity, prolonged isolation, sensory deprivation, and even physical and sexual abuse to push subjects to the brink of sanity, all in an attempt to wipe the slate clean and turn them into writable blank pages. This was an unforgivable ethical violation, a testament to how far a government is willing to go when fear runs too deep, turning its own citizens into unwitting guinea pigs. We know what they did, but to grasp their true crime, we must look at the specific fates that were crushed under the wheel of this experimental machine. So what horrifying trials actually took place, and who were the nameless victims sacrificed on the laboratory table for the ultimate goal of control?
We already know that MKUltra was a project dedicated to the destruction of the mind, but what took place inside those clandestine labs is even more gruesome than we can imagine. Starting at a site considered hallowed ground in medicine, the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. Here, a renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, was heavily funded by the CIA through a front organization. Under the pretense of healing, Cameron carried out what he called driving and psychic driving techniques. Patients, many of whom suffered only from minor anxiety issues, were turned into subjects of extreme mental torture. Imagine this. Patients were kept under drug-induced comas for weeks, sometimes months, in an artificial, unarousable state. During that time, negative, repetitive messages, sometimes up to 500,000 times, were broadcast into their ears through headphones or speakers placed under their pillows. Cameron's goal was to make their minds a blank slate, obliterate undesirable behavior patterns, and then reprogram them. Following these prolonged comas, Cameron also employed electroshock therapy at 30 to 40 times the standard intensity and radical sensory deprivation. The consequence? Many patients suffered total amnesia, forgetting their parents, life skills, and even their own names. They were reduced to relics of their former selves, and those mental wounds stayed with them for life. This was not treatment. This was systematic, government-funded torture. But the brutality of MKUltra was not only aimed at the vulnerable. One case that exposed this savagery to the light was the tragic story of Frank Olson. Olson was an Army bacteriologist working at Fort Detrick. In November 1953, during a covert CIA meeting at a remote cabin, Olson and his colleagues were secretly dosed with LSD by Sidney Gottlieb in their cocktails. Olson, a respectable and conscientious man, experienced a prolonged psychotic breakdown. He became agitated, paranoid, and finally, 9 days after the incident, he fell from the 13th-story window of the Statler Hilton Hotel in New York and died. While the death was initially ruled a suicide due to a nervous breakdown, the Olson family never accepted it. More than 20 years later, in 1975, during a congressional investigation, the story of Olson being dosed with LSD was revealed. But the suspicion remains. Was Frank Olson's death merely a tragic accident, or was it a murder to silence a man who had seen too much? The family requested the exhumation of his body, and a second autopsy showed an unusual injury on Olson's head that forensic scientists believed occurred before the fall. The darkest scenario, that he was rendered unconscious and thrown out the window to conceal MKUltra's secrets, remains a cold and haunting hypothesis to this day. There was even Project Midnight Climax, where the CIA set up safe houses disguised as secret brothels in San Francisco and New York. Men lured inside were unknowingly given LSD, and their reactions were observed through two-way mirrors, aiming to study the drug's effects in an uninhibited environment. This was the ultimate violation of human rights, using innocent individuals as guinea pigs for the intelligence agency's dark curiosity. These incidents are only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of the files were destroyed by order of CIA Director Richard Helms in 1973. This act was not just a cover-up, but a deliberate erasure of history, leaving thousands of potential victims who will never know the truth. But even though those documents were burned, the fire of the truth was not entirely extinguished. That very act of destruction, along with the fragmented clues that were recovered, ultimately led to the project's exposure, launching a congressional investigation that shook Washington and ensures the shadow of MKUltra stretches into the present day.
The 1973 destruction order by CIA Director Richard Helms was intended to bury Project MKUltra forever, preventing any investigation. But as is often the case with major secrets, not every piece of evidence succumbed to the flames. The end of this horrifying project came unexpectedly, not through a dramatic confession, but through a chance discovery among a pile of papers.
A few years later, in 1975, during an investigation into the CIA's domestic spying activities, known as Project Chaos, a small cache of financial records related to MKUltra was unearthed. These surviving documents, invoices, receipts, and budget details, provided irrefutable proof of the project's existence and its staggering scope. The ensuing inquiry by the Church Committee in the Senate, and later the Rockefeller Commission at the White House, immediately brought the scandal into public view. For the first time, the American people and the world were forced to confront the chilling truth. Their government had conducted unethical, mind control experiments on its own citizens. The investigation publicized details about the use of LSD, electroshock, and other brainwashing techniques. President Gerald Ford was compelled to meet with and publicly apologize to the family of Frank Olson and other victims. The fallout from the exposure was profound. Legally, victims' families, including those of Donald E. and Cameron's patients, sued the government and involved institutions, ultimately receiving compensation in lawsuits that dragged on for decades. Ethically, the incident spurred the creation of stricter regulations regarding human experimentation and the necessity of informed consent. It forced the scientific and medical communities to re-examine their roles and the ethical boundaries of research. But perhaps the most persistent and haunting legacy of MKUltra is its role in conspiracy culture. Because 90% of the records were destroyed, a massive void was created in the narrative, and this gap was quickly filled with speculation and theory. The Manchurian Candidate theory. Many believe MKUltra succeeded in creating programmed assassins or spies, and that these individuals are still operational. Any public event involving a person with erratic behavior is often attributed to CIA mind control. The modern expansion. There is a pervasive belief that the project never truly ended, but simply morphed into a more sophisticated form, with new code names such as MK Naomi or MK Search, and was outsourced to private companies or other intelligence agencies to continue research under a thicker veil of secrecy. Popular culture. MKUltra has permeated popular culture, becoming a shorthand for government manipulation and the secret control by the elite. MKUltra is more than just a dark chapter in history. It is a hole in public trust. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest horrors come not from the shadows or fictional monsters, but from the very people in power who were willing to sacrifice humanity to achieve what they called security. Decades later, the legacy of those mind experiments remains, and it poses a chilling question to all of us. Are we truly the masters of our thoughts, or do the secrets left in the ashes of MKUltra hold some key to manipulating our reality?